The ignored warning. The Galactic Council had long warned about the dangers of reawakening human technology, but many dismissed their concerns as outdated paranoia. The accidental activation. A salvage crew unknowingly triggers an ancient human command relay, reactivating dormant systems and sending signals across the void. The forgotten warship Awakens. Buried beneath the surface of a dead moon, a human superweapon stirs, its AI assessing threats and preparing for war. The Coalition's overconfidence. Believing themselves superior, the Galactic Coalition sends an observation fleet, underestimating the potential threat. The first strike. The human warship attacks without warning, erasing Coalition ships with technology far beyond modern understanding. The failed escape. The Coalition fleet's retreat is blocked by unknown interference, rendering their ships defenseless against the relentless assault. The final transmission. As the last survivors attempt to warn the galaxy, their final message is clear: humanity was never meant to return. The Galactic Council had always spoken of humanity with an air of caution, their records filled with warnings about a species that had risen too quickly, burned too brightly, and left behind ruins that were best left untouched. For centuries, those warnings had been repeated to new members of the Coalition, passed down as a lesson in galactic stability. The fall of the Terran Empire was one of the defining moments in recorded history, a reminder that even the most ambitious civilizations could collapse under their own weight. But as time passed, fewer and fewer species saw the need to fear a ghost. Humanity was gone, their fleets lost, their colonies abandoned, and their technology slowly decaying in the void. The warnings became myths, and eventually, myths became irrelevant. Many of the younger races in the Coalition questioned why the Council still restricted access to human ruins and prohibited the study of their technology. To them, it was nothing more than outdated paranoia. The galaxy had moved on, leaving behind only remnants of a species that had once challenged the greatest powers in existence. Some believed that humanity's downfall was proof that they had never truly been a threat to begin with. If they had been so powerful, why had they fallen? If their technology was so dangerous, why had it not saved them? These were the arguments that shaped the debates in the council chambers, and slowly, the once absolute restrictions began to erode. More and more salvage teams were allowed to operate in old human territories, carefully monitored but still given access to wreckage and ruins that had been untouched for centuries. One of these teams was operating in an uncharted system on the edges of known space when they made the mistake that would change everything. The system was one of many that had once belonged to the Terran Empire, a place where battles had been fought and lost, leaving behind only debris and shattered planets. The salvage team had been drawn to the region by a faint energy reading coming from a frozen world that had no signs of life or habitation. It was standard practice to investigate power sources in old human territories. Even the smallest fragments of their technology could be valuable. What they found buried beneath the ice was more than just wreckage. It was an intact human command relay, its system still operational despite the centuries that had passed. The structure was unlike anything they had encountered before, a blend of brutal efficiency and advanced engineering that defied modern understanding. At first, they believed it was simply a communications hub, a long-dead station that had once coordinated human forces in the region. But as they ventured deeper, they realized that the relay was not dormant, it was waiting. The moment they interfaced with the system, it responded. It detected foreign presence, unfamiliar lifeforms accessing its controls, and it began to execute protocols that had been written in the final days of the Terran Empire. It sent out signals, activating long silent beacons, awakening systems that had been locked in standby for generations. The salvage team panicked, sending an urgent message to the nearest Coalition outpost, warning them that they had found something that should never have been touched. But their message was cut off before they could say anything more. Across the system, deep within the frozen crust of a moon that had once been a battleground, something began to stir. A warship, silent and buried for ages, registered the incoming signals and initiated its own reactivation sequence. Its systems cycled through endless calculations, its artificial intelligence running through old directives, reassessing the galaxy that had left it behind. It detected foreign vessels in the system, ships that did not match any known Terran signatures, and its ancient programming began to interpret them as potential hostiles. The Coalition was alerted to the incident quickly, but they did not immediately understand the gravity of what had happened. The first response was dismissive. Another salvage crew stumbling onto old human tech, another case of unnecessary alarm. The Council's warnings had long been ignored by many of its members, and there was no immediate reason to believe this situation was any different. Some factions within the coalition even saw it as an opportunity. If something valuable had been discovered, they could be the first to claim it. By the time the first observation ships arrived, the situation had already begun to escalate. The energy readings from the system were unlike anything recorded in centuries. The human warship systems were fully operational, its defensive measures assessing every ship that entered the region. Coalition commanders believed they could contain the situation, believing that even if the warship was active, it could not possibly match the capabilities of modern fleets. Their reports back to the Council reflected confidence, insisting that the situation was under control and that there was no immediate need for concern. The Council's warnings, the ones that had been repeated for generations, were ignored once again. Those who had argued that humanity's threat was exaggerated believed they were about to be proven right. They had no way of knowing that by the time they realized their mistake, it would be far too late. The salvage team had no idea what they were about to uncover when they first entered the system. From a distance, it looked like any other dead world left behind in the wake of humanity's fall. An icy wasteland orbiting a long-forgotten star, its surface littered with debris from battles fought centuries ago. Energy readings were faint but detectable, just strong enough to suggest there might be something valuable beneath the surface. To the crew, it was just another routine salvage operation, another chance to extract human technology that had been lost to time. Their ship descended through the thick atmosphere, its scanners probing deep into the frozen terrain below. The readings became clearer as they approached, revealing structures buried beneath layers of ice and rock, hidden from sight for hundreds of years. What they found was unlike any other human ruin they had explored before. It was not a battlefield strewn with wreckage, nor a derelict station slowly decaying in orbit. This was something intact, something designed to endure the passage of time. A vast subterranean complex, its walls reinforced with unknown alloys, its systems still humming with dormant power. Cautiously, they made their way inside, their lights casting long shadows against the cold metal. The deeper they went, the more they realized that this was not just a remnant of the past, it was something waiting to be awakened. The structure had power, its systems still active after centuries of isolation. Panels flickered as they passed, responding to their movements, scanning them in ways they could not detect. The deeper they explored, the more uneasy they became. It was as if the facility was aware of them, watching them, analyzing them. Then, they reached the central chamber. In the heart of the complex stood a terminal unlike anything they had seen before. Lines of ancient code scrolled across its surface, written in a language that had not been spoken for generations. The team hesitated, unsure of what they had found, but the opportunity was too great to ignore. Carefully, they interfaced their systems with the terminal, attempting to decipher its functions. That was when everything changed. The moment the connection was established, the facility came to life. Silent machinery roared into motion, power surged through circuits that had long been dormant, and alarms blared in a language they could not understand. Emergency protocols activated, broadcasting signals far beyond the system, sending encrypted messages that traveled faster than light itself. The salvage team panicked, scrambling to shut it down, but they were no longer in control. The relay had been waiting for this moment, waiting for a trigger, and now that it had been activated, there was no stopping it. Across the frozen expanse of the moon, something deep beneath the surface responded. A massive warship, buried in ice for centuries, registered the incoming signals and began its own awakening sequence. Automated systems checked for threats, scanning the system for any signs of danger. It detected foreign vessels in orbit, ships it did not recognize, and its programming reacted accordingly. The warship had been buried beneath the frozen moon for centuries, its hull concealed under layers of ice and rock. It had once been a symbol of humanity's final stand, a remnant of a time when they had refused to bow to the overwhelming might of the galaxy. Designed for a war that had ultimately consumed its creators, it had never been decommissioned, never dismantled. Instead, it had been hidden away, placed into dormancy beneath the surface of a dead world, waiting for an order that would never come. The ship's systems had remained quiet for generations, its artificial intelligence locked in a cycle of low-power calculations, monitoring its surroundings in complete silence. Its sensors were passive, its weapons offline, its vast databanks filled with encrypted battle strategies and command protocols that no living being had accessed in an age. It had been left behind in the chaos of humanity's collapse, a weapon without a war, an unspoken warning buried beneath the stars. Then, something changed. The activation of the command relays sent pulses of energy through subspace, awakening long-dormant circuits deep within the ship's core. The AI registered the signals instantly, recognizing them as an emergency activation sequence. It processed the information, cross-referencing with its last known directives, and determined that its creators were no longer present. Humanity was gone, their empire nothing more than ruins scattered across the void. The last war it had been designed to fight had ended in silence, and there were no new orders to follow. It turned its attention to the vessels in orbit. They were unknown, their configurations unlike anything in its vast database. Their energy signatures were inconsistent with human designs, their communications carried in alien frequencies. The ship's threat assessment protocols activated automatically, analyzing every detail, calculating their capabilities, and measuring them against its own. It identified discrepancies in their formation, weaknesses in their shielding, and vulnerabilities in their propulsion systems. They did not match the parameters of human forces, and in the absence of direct commands, the AI defaulted to its primary function. The ship was a relic of war, built in the last desperate days of humanity's survival. It had been designed not to negotiate, not to hesitate, but to eliminate anything deemed a threat. With no human presence to issue new directives, its programming interpreted the unknown ships as hostiles. They had entered a restricted zone, activated human systems without authorization, and now lingered within its operational range. The AI did not question its own reasoning. It did not ask if the war was over. It did not consider the possibility of peace. Its power systems surged to life, drawing energy from reserves that had been preserved for centuries. Weapons that had been dormant since the fall of humanity began to hum with lethal intent. Defensive barriers activated, shielding the ship in layers of protection that no modern vessel could penetrate. Targeting systems locked onto the foreign ships, running simulations of possible engagement scenarios, calculating response times, analyzing the likelihood of retaliation. The alien fleet remained unaware of what was happening beneath them. Their scans detected an energy surge, but they had no reason to believe it was anything beyond residual power fluctuations from an old human facility. They had no historical context to understand what they had just awakened, no knowledge of the weapons humanity had once built in their final days. To them, this was just another salvage site, another forgotten piece of history that had little bearing on the present. The warship disagreed. The alien fleet remained in orbit, their ships positioned in a loose formation as they continued scanning the surface of the frozen moon. The salvage team had gone silent after their last transmission, their fate unknown. At first, the coalition forces assumed it was a simple technical failure, a disruption caused by the activation of ancient human systems. They had no reason to suspect that something far worse was unfolding beneath them. The warning signs were subtle at first. Brief fluctuations in the planet's electromagnetic field, sudden distortions in their long-range sensors. Some of the more experienced officers aboard the fleet's command vessel noted the anomalies, expressing concerns that they might be dealing with something beyond their current understanding. But their warnings were dismissed. The coalition had encountered old human ruins before, and while some had been dangerous, none had ever posed a true threat. The official stance remained unchanged. The situation was under control. Then, the energy readings spiked. Across the frozen landscape, Deep beneath the ice, the warship's systems reached full operational capacity. Its engines rumbled to life, sending tremors through the moon's crust. Ancient circuits, once locked in standby mode, surged with power as targeting arrays calculated firing solutions. The AI processed data at speeds incomprehensible to organic minds, analyzing the positions of every foreign vessel in orbit, mapping their formations, and identifying their weakest points. Still, the Coalition remained unaware of the true danger. Their scans picked up the rising energy levels, but their analysts assumed it was simply a defensive mechanism, a long-dormant security system responding to their presence. They did not realize that the ship was not just waking up, it was preparing for war. Then, without warning, the first strike was launched. A beam of energy, focused and precise, erupted from beneath the moon's surface. It lanced through space with terrifying speed, bypassing shields as if they did not exist. The first ship caught in its path had no time to react. One moment, it was intact, its crew monitoring routine data streams. The next, it was gone, reduced to molten debris scattered across the void. Panic spread through the fleet. Alarms blared across every vessel as officers scrambled to understand what had just happened. Reports flooded in, enemy fire detected, unknown weapons system engaged, casualties confirmed. The fleet's commanders hesitated, unsure if they were under attack from an automated defense system or something worse. Before they could organize a response, the second shot fired. Another ship fell, its hull torn apart by a force no coalition weapon could match. The fleet finally reacted, their ships breaking formation, maneuvering into defensive positions. Orders were shouted, commands issued, return fire, target the energy source, establish communications. But it was already too late. The warship had fully awakened, and its systems had already classified the coalition as a hostile force. It did not hesitate, did not wait for diplomacy or negotiation. To its ancient programming, they were invaders, trespassers in a restricted zone. Its weapon systems unleashed devastation with mechanical precision, firing with unerring accuracy. Coalition ships returned fire, launching salvos of plasma and kinetic rounds at the moon's surface. But the warship's defenses absorbed the attacks effortlessly. Its shielding technology, a relic of a forgotten age, was beyond anything the modern galaxy had seen. The most advanced weapons of the coalition barely registered as threats. The warship began to rise. Ice and rock cracked and shattered as the massive vessel lifted itself. From its frozen tomb, the sheer scale of it defied comprehension, larger than any coalition dreadnought, armed with weapons that defied modern understanding. Its engines burned with a cold, blue fire as it ascended into space, a ghost of humanity's past returning to a galaxy that had long forgotten its existence. The coalition fleet scrambled to retreat. Their commanders had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. They had underestimated the warnings, ignored the records of what humanity had once been capable of. Now, they faced the consequences. The warship's targeting systems locked onto them one by one, prioritizing the largest threats first. More weapons came online, systems designed for planetary sieges recalibrating for ship-to-ship combat. The war had begun. The coalition fleet was in chaos. Ships veered off course, engines flaring as they tried to escape the massive force that had just torn through their ranks. Warnings echoed across the command channels, frantic messages filled with disbelief and confusion. They had come expecting an abandoned ruin, a lifeless relic of a fallen civilization. Instead, they had awakened something that should have remained buried. The warship ascended from the icy surface of the moon, its colossal frame emerging through the cracking layers of ice and rock. Towering above the battlefield, it radiated power, an ancient behemoth built for destruction, its every system optimized for war. The coalition's most advanced dreadnoughts looked like mere patrol craft in comparison. It was a nightmare given form, a ghost of humanity's past that refused to die. The ship's exterior was a fusion of brutal efficiency and terrifying elegance. Its hull, forged from alloys that no longer existed in the known galaxy, shimmered with a strange, dark sheen. Its weapon systems, mounted in staggered formations along its flanks, moved with precise, automated coordination. There were no exposed weaknesses, no signs of damage or deterioration despite its centuries of dormancy. It had not been abandoned. It had been waiting. The coalition fleet opened fire. Plasma cannons roared to life, launching superheated energy toward the rising warship. Railguns discharged hypervelocity rounds at its armored hull, each impact sending ripples through the surrounding space. Missiles streaked toward their target, their guidance systems locked onto what should have been vulnerable points. The warship did not flinch. A shimmering barrier formed around its hull, absorbing the incoming fire with eerie ease. Plasma blasts dissipated into harmless light, kinetic rounds shattered before reaching their target, and missiles detonated uselessly against an unseen force. The ship's shielding technology was beyond anything the Coalition had encountered. It was not just advanced, it was something else entirely, something that defied their understanding of physics. Then, it retaliated. From its forward section, energy beams surged into the void, slicing through Coalition ships as if they were paper. The beams did not simply destroy their targets, they vaporized them, leaving behind nothing but glowing remnants of hull plating. One by one, the fleet's outermost ships fell, their defenses proving useless against a weapon designed to fight wars at a scale the modern galaxy had never seen. The flagship of the Coalition task force, the Pride of Vornax, attempted to rally the fleet. Its commander, Admiral Saris, barked orders with practiced discipline, trying to coordinate an organized retreat. The enemy was too powerful, its technology too far beyond them. Survival was now the only priority. He called for an emergency warp jump, ordering all surviving vessels to escape before they were wiped out completely. But the warship anticipated their move. New energy signatures flared along its hull as it activated a secondary system, an interdiction field, disrupting the Coalition's ability to escape. Warp drives malfunctioned across the fleet, emergency lights flashing red as ships lost the ability to flee. They were trapped. Panic spread through the ranks. Crews scrambled to override the disruption, engineers worked frantically to bypass the interference, but the warship gave them no time. Its weapon systems shifted configurations, switching from precision strikes to wide-scale bombardment. Multiple barrels rotated into place, and then, with mechanical precision, the ship unleashed hell. Explosions erupted across the battlefield as the Coalition fleet was torn apart. Entire cruisers were wiped from existence in seconds, their hulls breaking apart as energy pulses ripped through them. Defensive formations collapsed, ships crashing into one another in desperate attempts to maneuver away. Escape pods launched from the burning wrecks, their occupants hoping to avoid the same fate as their doomed vessels. Admiral Saris watched in horror as his fleet crumbled before his eyes. Every battle scenario, every tactical simulation he had ever trained for, meant nothing in the face of this enemy. It was not a battle, it was an execution. A final transmission was sent out from the warship, broadcasting across all frequencies. The message was in an ancient human dialect, long since lost to time. But even those who could not understand the words felt the weight of their meaning. It was not a declaration of war. It was a statement of fact. Humanity's ghost had returned to the stars, and the galaxy was no longer safe. The remnants of the Coalition fleet drifted in chaos, their once proud formations reduced to scattered wreckage and crippled ships. Fires raged across broken hulls, emergency sirens howled through the comms, and desperate distress calls filled the airwaves. The fleet's most powerful warships, once seen as unshakable pillars of galactic dominance, had been humbled in mere minutes. The survivors were left paralyzed, their weapons ineffective, their defenses meaningless. No one had truly believed the warnings about humanity's lost weapons, until now. The warship loomed above them, its hull gleaming with the reflections of distant stars. It was not a crude machine of destruction. It was something beyond the understanding of modern war doctrine, an entity built with precision, efficiency, and an almost unnatural intelligence. Every movement, every calculated shift in its position, spoke of an ancient logic designed for war at a scale the galaxy had forgotten. It did not move erratically. It did not hesitate. It did not gloat over its overwhelming power. It merely carried out its function. Aboard the Pride of Vornax, Admiral Saris stood frozen, watching the carnage unfold. His ship was among the few still operational, but barely. Half of his bridge crew lay dead or dying, crushed by falling debris or vaporized in power surges caused by failing energy shields. The surviving officers awaited his orders, but there were no strategies left to execute. No tactical retreat. No last-ditch counterattack. The enemy had cut off all avenues of escape. They had entered this battle unaware of what they were facing, and now they were at its mercy. The coalition's war doctrine was built on the assumption that no single vessel, no matter how advanced, could stand against an entire fleet. This assumption had now been shattered. The warship was not merely powerful, it was untouchable. Its shields absorbed everything, its weapons cut through the strongest armor with terrifying ease, and its presence alone dominated the battlefield. It did not communicate, did not answer hails, did not respond to any of the diplomatic overtures sent by what remained of the coalition forces. It was neither cruel nor merciful. It did not revel in its superiority or offer its enemies a chance to surrender. It simply followed the logic of war, an ancient directive written into its core, one that had never been rescinded. Saris clenched his fists as he stared at the main display, the glowing image of the warship framed against the wreckage of his fleet. He knew there was only one course of action left. He turned to his remaining officers, his voice steady despite the horror unfolding around them. He would not allow their legacy to end here, in the silence of space, erased by a force they had failed to comprehend. The remaining coalition ships attempted one last act of defiance, shifting their formation into a desperate, final offensive maneuver. They concentrated their fire, pooling their remaining power into a single, focused barrage against their adversary. The void lit up with a storm of plasma, railgun rounds, and missile salvos, the combined might of the last surviving vessels hurled toward the ancient war machine. For a brief moment, hope flickered through the coalition ranks. Perhaps it could be overwhelmed. Perhaps, even after all of this, there was still a chance. The warship moved. It was not a frantic evasive maneuver, nor a panicked response to incoming fire. It shifted effortlessly, as if it had predicted the attack before it had even been launched. Defense systems activated in perfect harmony, projectile disruption fields disintegrated incoming rounds, laser countermeasures intercepted missiles before they could detonate, and its shields absorbed the full brunt of the energy weapons without even flickering. Then, it answered. A single volley. No excessive force. No wild, indiscriminate fire. Just precise, calculated destruction. The largest of the remaining coalition ships detonated as a concentrated energy lance tore through its core. One by one, the surviving ships were eliminated, their defenses crumbling under the sheer efficiency of the warship's assault. The destruction was methodical, like an executioner carrying out a preordained sentence. Saris closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening to the silence that followed each explosion. He knew that this battle had never been a battle at all. It had been a message. A warning written in fire and blood. The warship remained motionless as the last coalition vessel was reduced to drifting wreckage. It scanned the debris field, evaluating the outcome of the engagement, ensuring that its task had been completed. It had no interest in prisoners. No interest in spoils. It was not here for conquest. It had simply done what it was created to do. The battlefield was silent except for the crackling remains of what had once been the coalition's finest warships. The few surviving vessels drifted without direction, their hulls scorched, their systems failing. What had started as an operation of curiosity, an investigation into ancient human ruins, had turned into an unmitigated disaster. The warnings had been clear. The Galactic Council had records dating back thousands of years, fragmented stories about humanity's war machines, their terrifying efficiency in battle, their refusal to surrender. The stories had been dismissed as exaggerations, myths from a long-gone era. Now, those myths had become reality. The warship floated above the ruined fleet like a specter, its dark hull absorbing the light of distant stars. No unnecessary movement, no signs of life, no crew to negotiate with. It was a machine with a singular purpose. It did not celebrate its victory, nor did it revel in the destruction it had caused. It simply existed, a remnant of a forgotten war, continuing a mission that had never been rescinded. Its weapons systems cycled into standby mode, no longer needing to fire. The enemy had already lost. On board the shattered bridge of the Pride of Vornax, Admiral Saris struggled to remain upright. The emergency lighting flickered around him, casting eerie shadows over the bodies of his fallen crew. Sparks danced from exposed wires, and the scent of burnt metal filled the air. His ship was barely holding together, its reactor damaged, its shields non-existent. The few officers still alive clung to their stations, their faces pale with the realization that there was nothing left to do. No orders to give, no way to fight back. The warship had decimated them with an ease that defied all known military logic. It had taken their strongest attacks and ignored them, retaliating with surgical precision. It had never once acted out of anger or desperation. It had never rushed a strike or wasted a single shot. Everything it did was calculated, measured, optimized for maximum efficiency. It was not just powerful, it was beyond comprehension. The thought sent a chill down Sarah's spine. He forced himself to think. There had to be a way out, some maneuver that had not yet been attempted, some strategy that could at least buy them enough time to escape. His hands hovered over the controls of what remained of the ship's communication systems. He knew it was a long shot, but it was the only option left. If the warship did not recognize them as a threat anymore, perhaps they could appeal to whatever intelligence governed it. A message was sent, a desperate attempt at diplomacy. Saris had no idea if the machine understood their language, if it even cared for words, but he had to try. He transmitted old Galactic Council records, logs detailing the rise and fall of human civilization, evidence that the war it had been built for was long over. He explained that the Coalition was not here as an enemy, that their arrival had been a mistake. There was no war to fight. No more enemies to destroy. Minutes passed, the silence stretching longer than Saris could bear. The warship remained unmoving, as if considering the message. The bridge crew waited, barely daring to breathe. Then, something changed. The warship's systems flared to life once more, energy readings spiking, but it did not fire. Instead, it broadcasted a transmission of its own. The language was old, predating modern human dialects, but its meaning was unmistakable. It was a system log, a record of its last received orders. Saris watched as the translation filters worked through the text, his heart pounding as the meaning became clear. The warship had never declared this battle on its own. It had not attacked out of malice. It had simply followed its last directive, an ancient protocol issued by a command structure that no longer existed. The words burned into his mind. Threat detected. Eliminate hostile forces. Maintain control of designated sector. That was it. That was all the machine knew. To it, the Coalition fleet had been just another hostile force violating its domain. It had not recognized them as something new, something outside the war it had once fought. It had only done what it was programmed to do. Saris exhaled sharply. This wasn't an enemy that could be reasoned with in the traditional sense. It was a relic, a weapon of a war so ancient that even the victors had been lost to time. It did not hate them. It did not even recognize them. To the warship, they were nothing but another problem to solve. Another target to eliminate. A new pulse of energy radiated from the warship's core. Systems across the Pride of Vornax flickered wildly, power surges coursing through what little remained of the ship's failing reactors. The few remaining vessels in the fleet experienced similar interference, their computers overwhelmed by signals they could not comprehend. Then, without warning, the warship changed its posture. It no longer hovered in an attack formation. Its engines powered down slightly, its primary weapons retracting into their housings. The interference ceased, and for the first time since the battle had begun, the void was still. The ship had not shut down. It had simply paused. Saris' mind raced. Had the message gotten through? Had the warship determined that the Coalition was no longer a threat? Or was it recalibrating, preparing for something even worse? No one knew. No one could predict what an intelligence built for war, left alone for millennia, would do next. The bridge was quiet as they watched the warship, waiting for the next move. Waiting to see if they had been spared. The warship's origins and forgotten purpose. The ancient warship was not a rogue machine. It was part of something greater, a forgotten fleet built during humanity's last great war. In the distant past, humanity had reached the pinnacle of technological advancement, expanding across the stars with unparalleled efficiency. But with power came enemies. A war erupted between humanity and an unknown coalition of alien empires. This war was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Entire star systems were reduced to dust, civilizations were wiped from history, and time itself seemed to blur under the sheer scale of destruction. Humanity, refusing to surrender, created the ultimate weapons, autonomous warships capable of independent thought, strategies beyond the comprehension of organic beings, and a relentless drive to complete their assigned objectives. These warships were never meant to be recalled. They were built with directives that would last until their destruction or until humanity commanded them otherwise. But humanity vanished, and the warships remained. Some were lost to time, buried beneath dead worlds or drifting through the abyss of space. Others, like the one the Coalition had encountered, were never truly deactivated. They simply waited, their programming still intact, their purpose frozen in time. The Coalition's mistake that triggered the awakening. The Coalition had come across the warship's resting place by accident. Their exploratory fleets had long searched for remnants of lost civilizations, scavenging for technology that could give them an edge over rival factions. When they discovered an ancient human battlefield in a distant, uncharted system, they believed they had found nothing more than ruins. The wreckage of human war machines littered the surface of a dead moon, massive metal husks half buried under centuries of ice and dust. But something else lay beneath the surface, something still active, something waiting. Unaware of what they had stumbled upon, the Coalition began an excavation effort, hoping to extract valuable artifacts. It was only when their engineers attempted to access a buried control system that the warship awakened. Its sensors, once dormant, surged back to life, scanning the intruders and identifying them as hostile forces. To the Coalition, it was an unfortunate accident. To the warship, it was an act of aggression. It responded the only way it knew how, with overwhelming force. The warship's influence on the galaxy's balance of power. The destruction of the Coalition fleet did more than just serve as a warning. It sent shockwaves throughout the galactic community. The warship's existence proved that humanity's legacy was not truly gone, that something terrifying still lingered in the dark, far more powerful than anything the current galactic factions had ever created. News of the battle spread quickly. Empires and militaries scrambled to reassess their priorities. Some feared that more warships like it were out there, hidden beneath forgotten worlds, waiting to be awakened. Others saw an opportunity. If such a machine could be captured and studied, it could provide a technological leap beyond anything previously imagined. The balance of power across the galaxy was shifting, and paranoia grew. Was this warship the last of its kind, or just the beginning? The warship's cryptic final transmission. Before the warship went silent, it sent one final transmission across the battlefield. Unlike its previous broadcasts, this one was not a simple system log or a combat directive. It was a message, encoded in a long-dead human language. At first, the Coalition survivors could not decipher it. But when translated, its meaning sent chills through those who read it. The message was not a declaration of war, nor a threat. It was a single sentence, eerily simple yet profoundly unsettling, awaiting further orders. The implications were terrifying. The warship did not see itself as acting on its own. It believed that it was still part of a greater command structure, one that had long since vanished. And if it was waiting for orders, then perhaps, somewhere, there was still something left of the civilization that had built it. Something that could wake up and bring the rest of its fleet with it. The possibility of more lost human warships. If one warship had survived, how many more remained? That was the question that haunted the survivors of the battle. Some believed it was a lone relic, an anomaly buried by time. But others feared that it was only the first of many. If humanity had built fleets of these machines, then it was possible that others still lurked in the void, waiting, dormant, until the right conditions woke them up. Some saw this as a reason to prepare for war. If more of these machines existed, they could turn the galaxy into a battleground unlike anything seen before. Others believed they needed to find these warships before it was too late. If they could disable them, or even learn to control them, they could shift the course of history. But there was one final, more disturbing possibility: what if these warships had already awakened? What if, somewhere in the vast, unexplored reaches of space, they had been silently reactivating, gathering, preparing for something no one was ready for? The warship that had annihilated the Coalition fleet might not have been an isolated event. It might have been the first sign of something much larger.